Roman gladiators were basically pro-athletes, not what you think. We think we know their story. We see them in our movies as shirtless giants fighting to the death in a circle of sand while the bloodthirsty emperor decides their fate with a thumb. We imagine a life of pure misery ending in a violent scream. But the reality of the Roman gladiator was far more complex, far more professional, and strangely, much more like a modern-day professional athlete than a common slave. For 20 minutes, forget the movies. Let us walk into the Ludus, the training school, and see what it actually felt like to be a chi, star of the sand in the greatest empire on earth. The journey of a gladiator didn't start in the Colosseum. It started with a legal contract. While many were prisoners of war or criminals, a shocking number, nearly 20% by some estimates, were free men who volunteered. They were called octorati. These were men who had fallen into debt or were seeking glory. You might expect these warriors to eat a high-protein diet of meat. In reality, they were known as horderi, or barley men. They were essentially vegetarians. They loaded up on complex carbohydrates, barley, and beans to create a layer of subcutaneous fat. This wasn't because they were out of shape. It was a tactical choice. A thick layer of fat protected their vital organs from shallow slashes. It allowed them to bleed for the crowd, looking wounded and heroic without actually dying. The training was grueling. You weren't just taught to fight, you were taught to perform. Every gladiator belonged to a specific class. You might be a mermalo, wearing a heavy helmet with a fish crest and carrying a large shield. Or perhaps you were a retiarius, the most hated and most skilled of them all, the man who fought with nothing but a net and a trident. This was the original combat sports matchmaking. The Romans loved to pair different styles against each other. The heavy, slow tank versus the fast, lightly armored net man. The day of the games began not with a fight, but with a parade. The gladiators would enter the arena in elaborate, silver-plated armor that they would never actually wear in a fight. It was too heavy and too expensive. This was the red carpet moment. The crowd would place bets, sometimes wagering entire fortunes on a favorite fighter. And here is the secret that Hollywood gets wrong: the death match. In a modern boxing match, the referee's job is to keep the fighters safe. In the Colosseum, the Summa Rudis, the senior referee, had the same job. Gladiators were incredibly expensive to train, feed, and house. If a gladiator died in every fight, the business would go bankrupt in a week. Most fights ended in a reprieve. If a fighter fought bravely but lost, the crowd and the editor would almost always let him live to fight another day. But when the thumb did go down, it wasn't a chaotic stabbing, it was a ritual. The loser would kneel, look his opponent in the eye, and accept the steel without a sound. This was the Roman ideal of virtues, the idea that how you died was more important than how you lived. physical training, the life of a gladiator was sustained by a sophisticated medical system that rivaled modern sports medicine. Large Ludi employed some of the finest physicians in the empire, including the legendary Galen. These specialists were experts in trauma surgery and wound management, utilizing opium for pain and specialized salves to ensure their high-value assets returned to the arena as quickly as possible. This level of care reinforces the idea that these men were far more than expendable fodder. Their longevity was a financial priority for their owners. The arena itself was a masterpiece of psychological warfare and sensory overload. Beneath the floor sat the hypogeum, a subterranean labyrinth of tunnels and elevators. Gladiators would wait in the darkness, listening to the muffled roar of 50,000 fans above them, before being hoisted up into the blinding Mediterranean sun. This dramatic reveal was designed to shock the system and pump adrenaline through the fighter's veins, ensuring the first strike was as explosive as the crowd demanded. It was the ancient equivalent of a stadium light show and a walkout theme song. Furthermore, the social standing of a gladiator was a bizarre paradox known as infamia. Legally, they were on the same level as pimps and actors, individuals who had forfeited their citizenship and were considered shameful in the eyes of the law. Yet socially, they were the empire's biggest heartthrobs. Elite Romans would host gladiator dinners just to be in their presence, and their likenesses appeared on everything from oil lamps to children's toys. They were excluded from polite society, yet they were the undisputed kings of the Roman streets. The economics of the games also mirrored modern corporate sponsorships. Sponsoring a day at the arena was the fastest way for a politician to buy popularity, but it was a risky gamble. If a gladiator was killed, the sponsor had to pay the owner a massive replacement fee that could be 50 times the cost of a surviving fighter. This financial penalty acted as a powerful deterrent against unnecessary death. The games were a delicate balance of bloodlust and bookkeeping, where the ledger often had more influence over the thumbs up than the crowd did. Ultimately, the gladiator-esque life was defined by a specific type of brotherhood found only in the shadow of death. Despite being forced to fight one another, many gladiators formed collegia, or unions, to ensure that if a member fell, he would receive a proper burial and his family would be cared for. They were rivals in the sand, but brothers in the barracks, bound by a contract that promised glory for the few and a dignified silence for the many. But the tragedy of the gladiators, that even with the fame and the barley and the sweat perfume, you were still a man living on a knife's edge. You were a person turned into a product. Your scars were your resume, and your life was a gift from a crowd that would just as easily watch you die for a better show. We look back at the Colosseum and see a monument to cruelty. But if we look closer, we see a mirror of our own obsession with spectacle, celebrity, and the high price of entertainment. The gladiator wasn't just a fighter. He was the ultimate symbol of the Roman world, a man who could turn his own suffering into an art form. The sand has long since dried, and the cheers have turned to silence. But the story of the man in the arena remains one of the most human chapters in our history.